His slap cracked across the prison yard like
New
a gunshot.
fish.
Loud, flat, final. 50 hardened inmates
Smile
fell
for
silent
me.
at once. Every eye turned toward the young man who refused to hit the ground.
Welcome to my house, boy.
Hartley smiled the way predators smile. Blake answered with silence, the kind of silence that unsettled everyone watching. The guard watched from above, keys swinging against his belt. He looked away slowly, like he'd witnessed this exact scene 100 times before. You ever watched a man get struck simply for stepping into a room? Stone Creek State Penitentiary sat 2 hours past the last gas station on the highway, hidden behind 3 fences and an ocean of razor wire. Within its walls lived 1,200 men. The yard smelled like rust, bleach, and stale rainwater. Sound traveled strangely in that place. A single cough echoed for seconds. A whisper could carry the length of a hallway, and every man learned fast that silence was its own form of currency. Marcus Hale had been locked inside for 9 days. Before Stone Creek, his name had carried real weight. State lightweight champion. 18 wins, 0 losses, 14 knockouts. Promoters had flown in from both coasts to meet him. One of them slid a contract across a diner table, a number with 6 figures attached and a private jet thrown in. Marcus read it twice, then folded it in half and slid it back across the table. "My mother's sick," he told the man. "I'm not leaving her. She had stage 3 cancer. The treatments cost more than he could earn in the ring. So he picked up night shifts at a warehouse off the interstate. He trained at sunrise, worked until dark, and sat beside her hospital bed in whatever hours remained. He told himself the title could wait. Titles always wait. Mothers don't. Then came the robbery he never committed. A gas station 2 blocks from his gym got hit at midnight. The clerk described a tall black man with a fighter's build. Marcus was tall. Marcus was black. Marcus had a fighter's build. The security footage was grainy and useless. The lineup was rushed and sloppy, and the public defender assigned to him was juggling 40 other cases that same month. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. The judge handed down 6 years. He never once raised voice, not at the verdict, not the sight of his mother's face in the courtroom gallery. He simply looked down at his own hands, the same hands that had ended fights in seconds, and made out of himself one promise. In here, those hands would stay down. One swing, even a justified one, could cost him years he didn't have to spare. He refused to give the system that excuse. He would serve his time and go home to her. That was the entire plan. Derek Stone was the problem. Stone ran Block C like a personal kingdom. 6'4", 240 pounds, a neck built like a fire hydrant, and a laugh that made new arrivals flinch on instinct. He'd been locked up 11 years for putting a man into a coma over a card game gone wrong. He had a taste for new arrivals. He called them tribute. He took their commissary, their phone minutes, their dignity, and once they had nothing left to give, he took their fear and kept it close like a pet. It made Stone untouchable wasn't his size. It was Officer Russ Talbot. Talbot worked the Block C floor, keys low, eyes lower. Whenever Stone collected his tribute, Talbot found some excuse to be standing at the far end of the corridor. Whenever a camera might catch something it shouldn't, Talbot suddenly remembered it needed cleaning. He never discussed any arrangement out loud. They never had to. A nod here, a blind eye there. Stone kept the block quiet, and Talbot filed reports declaring everything ran smoothly. So when Stone slapped the new arrival in the yard, he expected the usual reaction. A flinch, a stammer, tribute paid in full. He had no idea what he'd just provoked. He didn't know that the quiet man's hands had once been insured for more money than Talbot earned in a decade. He didn't know about the 18 wins, the 14 knockouts, the reflexes drilled so deep into muscle memory they fired before conscious thought ever caught up. He saw a slender black man with downcast eyes and read it as weakness. The entire block read it the same way. They were all looking at the wrong thing entirely. They watched Marcus's lowered head and completely missed the stillness underneath it, the kind of calm that has nothing to do with surrender. It was a fighter pacing himself. It was a man counting down the rounds. Marcus lay on his bunk that first week, listening to Stone's laugh roll down the tier like a wave. He thought of his mother's voice on the phone, growing thinner with every call. He thought of his promise. Keep the hands down. Get home to her. He had no idea that promise was about to cost him nearly everything. The cafeteria ran on unwritten rules. Where you sat, who you dared to look at, how long you held a stare. Marcus learned them by watching. He took a corner seat, back against the wall, tray set in front of him. Gray meatloaf, 2 slices of bread, a carton of milk he was saving for the calcium. He almost made it through the meal undisturbed. Stone crossed the room slowly, 2 men trailing behind him like shadows. Hall noticed before Marcus did. Forks went still. By the time the shadow fell across his tray, Marcus already understood. You're sitting in my seat, Stone said. There were 40 empty seats scattered around the hall. Marcus began to rise. He didn't argue. He simply reached for his tray to move it. Stone got there first. One thick hand flipped it over. The tray spun, and meatloaf, bread, and milk struck Marcus square in the chest before sliding down to the floor. The carton burst open. White liquid ran down his gray shirt like something had split apart inside him. The hall laughed. Not every man in the room, but enough that the laughter formed its own wall, and Marcus stood inside it, dripping, completely alone. Clean it up, Stone said. You made the mess. Marcus only looked at him, and in that half-second something flickered behind his eyes, fast as a counterpunch, then gone again just as quickly. He knelt down. He gathered the bread. He wiped the milk from the floor with a napkin that disintegrated in his hand. He did it without a single word, the way a man performs a task he has already decided he will survive. Stone watched him, grinning, feeding off every second of it. Good boy. The injustice of it filled the room like smoke. 200 men, and not one of them stood up. Not one of them spoke, because every single one had already done the math, and the math always landed on the same answer. Crossing Stone cost far more than it was worth. Marcus carried the ruined tray to the bin. His hands never shook. By the door, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, Officer Russ Talbot watched the entire thing unfold. When Stone glanced his way, Talbot did the smallest, quietest thing imaginable. He nodded. The slap had been a test. The tray had been a message. What came next was a campaign. Stone understood power the way some men understand weather patterns. You don't seize it all at once. You take it slowly, piece by piece, until the other man forgets he ever owned anything at all. So he started small, and he made it last. Night 1, Marcus returned to his cell and found his mattress thrown to the floor, his sheets stripped away, his family photograph slid under the bars, and stamped flat with a boot print. His mother's face stared up at him through a smear of gray dirt. He picked it up. He wiped it clean with his thumb. He said nothing. Night 2, his commissary disappeared entirely. The soap, the stamps, the instant coffee he'd bought, with money he didn't really have to spare. He found the empty wrappers arranged in a neat little row on his pillow, a deliberate signature. Night 3, they came for the letters. Marcus wrote to his mother every single day. He waited for her replies the way a drowning man waits for air. Stone learned about this, because Stone learned everything, and he made certain the letters stopped arriving. They piled up somewhere they were never supposed to, and Marcus sat through mail call with an open, hopeful face that slowly closed itself off, day after day. Here is what Stone saw from inside his own mind. He saw a man breaking right on schedule. He'd run this exact pattern dozens of times before. There was a rhythm to it, almost a music, and Marcus appeared to be dancing right along with everyone before him. The lowered eyes, the flat voice, the way he flinched at nothing at all. To Stone, silence had only ever meant one thing, fear. And fear was the sweetest commodity the block had to offer. He lay on his bunk at night, replaying the sound the tray had made, the white milk running down a stranger's chest, and he smiled up at the ceiling. This one would break beautifully. They always did. He was reading the wrong man entirely, because what looked like fear was something else completely. It was discipline. It was 18 fights worth of a cornerman's voice still echoing in his ear. Stay calm. Don't load up. 8 for your round. Marcus wasn't shrinking away. He was holding a line. And that line was a promise made to a woman lying in a hospital bed. Every night, Stone pushed against that line, It bent. It never broke. By night 4, the others joined in, because cruelty is always easier inside a crowd. Stone kept a crew, 4 or 5 men who fed off his leftovers and feared his moods more than anything else. He took turns. One bumped Marcus hard in the shower line, daring him to turn around and react. One spat directly into his food. One stood outside his cell at lights out, describing in a low, patient voice all the things that happen to men who think they're somehow better than this place. Marcus absorbed it all. He took it the way stone takes rainfall. And Talbot watched it happen, every time. There was a camera mounted at the end of the Block C tier, sealed inside a steel cage, high up where nobody could reach it. It saw everything it was supposed to see. But Talbot knew that camera's maintenance schedule better than the warden himself did. He knew exactly when it logged itself offline. He knew the precise angle of the blind spot near the showers, the one place the lens could never reach. And on the nights Stone worked, Talbot suddenly found paperwork that needed finishing at the far desk. His back turned to the tier, his radio volume turned low. Once, a younger guard asked him about it directly. "You see what's happening to the new guy in C?" Talbot didn't even look up. "You see a quiet block," he said. "A quiet block is a good block. Don't go and make it loud." The younger guard fell quiet too. That's exactly how it spreads. Then, on night 5, the phone call came through. Marcus got 4 minutes on the tier phone. His aunt's voice came through small and strained, and he knew before she even said the words. His mother had taken a turn for the worse. The treatment wasn't holding anymore. The doctors had started using words like comfort and time, words that meant the end was drawing closer, while he stood trapped behind 3 fences, completely unable to reach her. "She asks about you," his aunt said. "Every single day she wants to know you're okay." Marcus closed his eyes. Down the tier, Stone's laugh rolled toward him like an incoming wave. "Tell her I'm okay," Marcus said. His voice didn't waver. "Tell her I'm coming home." He hung up the phone. He pressed his forehead against the cold cinder-block wall and breathed. In for 4 counts, out for 4, exactly the way his trainer had taught him to breathe between rounds, when his body wanted desperately to quit. One swing. That's all it would take to feel better for a single second and lose everything that actually mattered. More years added on, more fences between them. His mother dying alone while he sat in a hole for teaching a lesson nobody would ever believe he had the right to teach. He kept his hands down. Stone found him there against the wall and mistook the posture entirely for defeat. In his mind, this was the moment, the break. He stepped close and put his mouth right beside Marcus's ear. "You're learning," he murmured. "Couple more weeks and you'll be carrying my tray, maybe shining my shoes too." He patted Marcus's cheek twice, gently. The worst kind of gentle. Quiet boys make good pets. In his head, Stone was already celebrating the victory. He pictured Marcus a month from now, hollowed out, useful, broken in like an old pair of boots. He had never once considered the other possibility. That a man can be quiet because he chooses kindness. That a man can be still because he is strong, not weak. That the difference between fear and control is completely invisible right up until the exact moment it isn't. Marcus didn't move. He let Stone walk away laughing. But that night, lying on a mattress thrown on the floor, he did something he hadn't done since the day they read his sentence aloud. He flexed his right hand in the darkness, slowly, finger by finger, feeling the old machinery wake back up. Just checking. Just in case. 2 cells down, the camera's red light blinked steadily at an empty wall. The library was the one quiet place inside Stone Creek. Stone never read. Marcus went there for the silence. He found an old man already seated, gray-bearded, half-moon glasses low on his nose, a chess book open in front of him. The man watched Marcus take a seat. He watched the way Marcus set his hands flat on the table, and he smiled. "You know those hands," he said. Marcus looked up. "Frank Delgado, I trained fighters for 30 years before landing in this place." He tapped the table twice. "Saw you take the state title. Round 9. You dropped Reyes with a check hook nobody in that arena saw coming." He chuckled quietly. "I saw it. And I've been watching you walk this block ever since, like a man holding his breath." I am not here to fight, Marcus said quietly. I know that too, Frank said, leaning in. That's exactly why they think you're weak. Out there, that restraint made you a champion. In here, it's getting you killed slowly. He paused. What's your plan? Marcus stayed silent a long moment. Keep my head down, do my time, get home to my mother, and if they won't let you? Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Frank nodded slowly, the way a cornerman nods when the bell is just about to ring. Then you don't start it, he said. But son, you finish it. Outside, the count whistle blew. It happened on the 7th night. Marcus should have seen the warning signs in the small things. Stone's crew went quiet at dinner. Stone didn't touch his food at all. He simply watched Marcus across the hall with the patient look of a man who has already set a trap and only needs to wait. Near the end of the tier, as the lights dimmed for the night count, Officer Russ Talbot walked his slow, familiar walk toward the far desk, sat down, and turned his back to the block. The shower room was the blind spot. Everyone knew it. The camera at the end of the tier couldn't reach inside that tiled corner. No lens, no witness, just water and concrete, and whatever a man might do there in the dark. Marcus went to wash before lockdown. He heard the door swing shut behind him. He heard the bolt slide into place. He turned, and there they were, 4 of them. Stone in front, 2 of his crew flanking him. A 4th standing by the door. The 4th man held something low in his hand, half hidden. Marcus's eyes went straight to it on instinct, the way a fighter clocks any threat, and he realized it was a phone, recording. He wanted this filmed, a trophy, a lesson for the whole block to pass around afterward. No more pets, Stone said. He cracked his knuckles. Time you learned what happens to quiet boys who refuse to break. You don't want to do this, Marcus said. His voice stayed even. Open the door, walk away. Nobody has to get hurt tonight. Stone laughed. They all laughed along with him. It was the last easy breath any of them would take for a long while. The first man came from the right, swinging wild. A haymaker telegraphed from a mile away. Anyone watching the video later, it would look like the man simply fell over. To Marcus, time slowed down the way it always had, the way it had since he was 16 years old and first stepped through the ropes. The punch arrived in a lazy arc, and Marcus slipped it by a single inch. He didn't even step backward. He just moved his head, let the fist sail past his ear, and answered with one short left hook to the body. The man folded around it like a coat slipping off a hook and dropped onto the wet floor, gasping for air. 1 second. Done. The second man lunged before the first had even landed, grabbing for Marcus's collar. Marcus caught his wrist, turned hips, and used the man's own momentum to spin him into the tile wall. A short right uppercut met him on the way in. There was a sharp, clean crack, and the second man sat down hard against the wall and stayed there, eyes swimming. 3 seconds. Stone roared and charged, all 240 pounds of him, arms spread wide to crush whatever stood in his path. This was the moment he'd built toward, for 11 years, the bull rush that had ended a dozen men before. Marcus didn't meet it head-on. He pivoted, light on his feet, and let the giant stumble past him into empty air. As Stone turned off balance, Marcus stepped in and threw the punch the old man in the library had named for him, the check hook. Short, tight, perfect, landing flush on the jaw with the full rotation of his body behind it. Stone's knees disappeared beneath him. The big man went down like a collapsing building, slow at the top, fast at the bottom, hitting the floor, hard enough that the standing water jumped. 7 seconds. The 4th man, the one holding the phone, stopped recording his trophy and started unintentionally recording his own retreat. He backed into the corner, his hand shaking, the camera still pointed forward because he'd forgotten how to lower it. I'm out, he stammered. I'm out, man, I'm out. Marcus looked at him. He was breathing hard, but his hands were already dropping back down to his sides. He hadn't chased a single one of them. He hadn't thrown one punch that wasn't directly answering another. Every blow had been the smallest possible thing required to stop the next threat, and not 1 ounce more. Then go, Marcus said. 12 seconds, start to finish. 4 men down on the floor, 1 man standing completely untouched, his chest rising and falling steadily, water running off his fists. And here is the part the whole world would later replay in slow motion. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't stand over Stone in triumph. He didn't say a single word of victory. He walked over to the second man, the one slumped against the wall, with the swimming eyes, knelt down, and checked that he was still breathing. Then he stood, reached over, and turned off the still-running shower, and walked to the bolted door. He worked it open with steady hands and stepped out into the tier, leaving the four of them groaning behind him in the dark. He thought it was finally over. It was only just beginning, because the fourth man's phone had captured all 12 seconds in full. Every slip, every counter, the check hook that dropped the giant, and then the moment that made it impossible to look away. The winner kneeling down to check on the man who had come to hurt him. The video left Stone Creek the very next morning, smuggled out the way everything leaves a prison, hand to hand. By nightfall it had reached somewhere it could never be pulled back from. The internet did exactly what the internet does. It exploded. By the third day, the clip had earned a name. People started calling it 12 seconds. It spread across phones, subway cars, break rooms, and living rooms across the entire country. Commentators broke it down frame by frame. A retired trainer pointed at the screen and said, "That's not a brawler. That's a schooled fighter. Look at that footwork." Strangers argued across comment threads 100,000 replies deep. Who was he? Why was a man who moved like that locked away in a place like that? And why, when he could have done so much worse, did he stop the very instant the danger stopped? The question spread even faster than the fight itself. People who had never once heard the name Marcus Hale were typing it now, sharing it, asking each other to find out who he really was. A reporter 2 states away saved the clip and started making phone calls. Inside Stone Creek, none of that was the story yet. Inside, there was only the sound that came next. Marcus had been back on his bunk for less than an hour, his knuckles still aching, his mind already turning toward the cost of what he'd done, when the night cracked wide open. Boots pounded in the corridor, a lot of them. The metal shriek of the block alarm wound up, red light strobing across the ceiling, and a voice came hard and flat over the speaker. Lock down all units. Cell doors began slamming shut down the tier, one after another, closer and closer to his own. Marcus sat up. Through the bars he saw Talbot walking fast now, no longer at his far desk, his face pale and furious, a radio pressed against his mouth. And Marcus understood, in the cold way you understand a punch that's already been thrown, that the men on the floor were going to get their version of events told first. The story they told was simple, and the lie usually is. By morning, the official version had hardened into accepted fact. Inmate Marcus Hale, unprovoked, had ambushed 4 men in the Block C showers. He was dangerous. He was trained. He had concealed a violent history and exploded without warning. 4 inmates were in the infirmary, 1 with a fractured jaw, and the prison had a duty to respond. It didn't seem to matter that the math made absolutely no sense. 1 man, 4 attackers, a bolted door, a blind spot chosen on purpose. Nobody in the warden's office bothered to ask why 4 men would corner a single man in the one room without a camera. They had their paperwork, and the paperwork came directly from Officer Russ Talbot, who wrote that he had heard a disturbance, responded immediately, and found Hale standing over the victims. Victims, that was the word they chose to use. Stone played it perfectly from his hospital bed, wired jaw and all. When the internal review came to take his statement, he could barely speak, which made him look even more like prey. He scrawled his account on a notepad in a shaking hand. He came at us. We tried to stop him. He's an animal. He underlined animal twice. Warden Patrick Garrity read the report and made his decision in under a minute. Garrity was a man who despised exactly 2 things above all else: paperwork and attention. The video had handed him a flood of both at once. The fastest way to make it all stop, he believed, was to bury the man at the center of it. He signed the order before lunch. Marcus was pulled from his cell and taken to the special housing unit, solitary confinement. A concrete box the size of a parking space with a steel door, a slot for food, and a window the width of a hand. 23 hours a day inside, 1 hour if he was lucky in a cage that passed for outdoor time. They told him it was for his own protection. They told him it was pending investigation. They did not tell him how long. He sat on the bunk and held his own silence in both hands. He thought of his mother somewhere out past the fences, asking after a son who had simply vanished from every phone call and visiting list. He thought of the promise he'd made and kept for 9 days, then broken in 12 seconds. And he couldn't even tell himself he'd been wrong. He'd had no real choice. But the truth never seemed to matter in here. The truth had a fractured jaw and a handwritten notepad, and the truth was winning. Outside the walls, the same fight was tearing the country in half. The video had made Marcus famous, but fame is a coin with two faces. Every voice calling him a hero, another called him exactly what Stone had written down. They didn't know him at all. He saw 12 seconds in a prison uniform and decided the uniform was the entire story. He was an inmate. He'd put 4 men in the hospital. Somebody dug up the old robbery conviction and posted it without the word alleged, without mentioning the grainy tape or the rushed lineup, just the headline. Viral hero is actually a convicted armed robber. The narrative turned overnight. People who had cheered for him now wrote that they felt fooled. The prison said nothing to correct any of it. Silence served their interests perfectly. Let the man be painted as a monster in the public eye, and no one would ask hard questions about a convenient blind spot in the showers. It might have ended right there. A man quietly erased inside a concrete box while the world moved on to the next viral clip. Except the video had reached one more person. Vanessa Cole had spent 20 years suing prisons. She ran a small legal aid office with bad coffee and a wall full of case files, and she carried a particular allergy to official stories that arrived too clean. She watched 12 seconds the way she watched everything. Twice, slow, the second time with the sound completely off. And what she saw wasn't what the headlines saw. She saw a man who never advanced. She saw counters, not attacks. She saw 4 aggressors and exactly 1 defender. And she saw that defender stop the very instant he could kneel down and check a fallen man's breathing. You do not, in Vanessa Cole's long experience, get footage like that from an ambush. You get it from a man trying very hard not to kill anyone. She drove 4 hours to Stone Creek and demanded to see him. They placed her in a visiting booth behind scratched glass. And when they brought Marcus in, thinner than the video showed, eyes hollowed out from the box, she introduced herself in a single sentence. My name is Vanessa Cole. I think you're being railroaded, and I'd like to prove it. Marcus studied her through the glass. He had learned not to hope for anything. They have 4 witnesses, he said, and a guard's report, and my record. He have a phone video that already made me out to be the villain. You have a phone video, Cole said, that I happen to be able to read far better than they can. She opened her folder. Tell me everything. Start with night 1. So he did. The mattress on the floor, the boot print on his mother's photograph, the letters that never arrived, the 7 nights, the bolted door, and the one detail that made Vanessa Cole stop writing entirely and look up. He recorded it himself, she said slowly. Stone wanted it filmed to humiliate me, Marcus said. To document an execution, she said. And instead, he documented the exact opposite. She tapped her pen against her teeth, thinking it through. But it's still his word against yours on how the whole thing started. A jury hears convicted felon attacks 4 men, and they fill in the blanks the easy way. She frowned. I need more than just the phone. I need the room. I need the 7 nights leading up to it. I need to show a clear pattern. There are no cameras in the showers, Marcus said. That's exactly why they chose it. No, Cole agreed. But there are cameras everywhere else. She started flipping through her pages faster now. The tier, the cafeteria, the corridor outside your cell. 7 nights of harassment doesn't leave behind just one piece of footage. It leaves dozens. Mattress on the floor, that's a corridor camera. Commissary stolen, tier camera. Every single time, one of them came to your cell at lights out. She looked up, and something sharpened in her expression. Mr. Hale, where I come from, when an institution chooses one specific blind spot this carefully, It isn't because they only own one camera. It's because they know exactly what every other camera would show. She filed the request that very afternoon, a formal demand for every minute of footage from Block C, covering the relevant nights. 3 days later, the prison's response landed on her desk. She read it once and went completely still. The footage from the Block C tier camera for all 7 nights was missing, logged as down for maintenance. Every single night Stone had worked his campaign, the lens had been dark. Someone had turned it off on purpose. A camera turned off deliberately is not the end of a case to Vanessa Cole. It was the beginning of one, because a missing tape isn't innocence. It's a confession with the words scratched out. She brought the maintenance log to a formal hearing and stood in front of a review panel, the warden, and a state corrections official who had flown in specifically because the video simply would not stop trending. Patrick Garrity had wanted this whole matter handled quietly. Instead, he had a lawyer with a folder, and the entire country watching the door. Cole began gently. She laid out the official story first, in their own words, so everyone in the room could hear how suspiciously clean it sounded. Unprovoked, ambush, animal. Then she set the maintenance log down on the table. The Block C tier camera, she said, failed for 7 consecutive nights. The exact same 7 nights my client says he was being harassed. It recovered the very morning after the shower incident. 7 nights dark, then suddenly working again right on cue. She looked directly at Garrity. That's either the most precisely timed equipment failure in the history of corrections, or someone scheduled it deliberately. Garrity's jaw worked silently. Equipment fails, he said finally. It does, Cole agreed pleasantly. Which is exactly why, 8 months ago, your facility installed a pilot program. Secondary cameras, smaller units, an entirely separate system on a separate drive, mounted specifically to cover the blind spots the old cameras missed. She let that sit in the air, including the corridor directly outside the Block C showers. The room's temperature seemed to change. Talbot, standing against the wall, went very still in a way that everyone in the room noticed immediately. Because Talbot had known the old camera's schedule by heart. He had never once known about the new one. Nobody on the floor had. It was a memo he'd never bothered to read, a second eye he'd never accounted for, recording quietly the entire time he turned his back at the far desk. Cole opened her laptop. She did not play the fight first. She played the 7 nights leading up to it. 8-1, a grainy corridor feed, time-stamped clearly. 3 men outside Marcus's cell, the mattress dragged out onto the floor. A boot coming down on something small and square. Night 3, Stone's crew laughing at the mail slot. Night 5, Marcus against the cinderblock wall with the phone pressed to his ear, Stone leaning in to pat his cheek twice, gently. And the 7th night, the corridor outside the showers, 4 men filing in, Stone entering last, throwing the bolt shut behind himself. The timestamp read 9:14 p.m. My client, Cole said quietly, entered that room at 9:13. 4 men followed him in and locked the door from the inside. You'll notice no one is dragging anyone in. You'll notice exactly who turned that lock. She closed her laptop. That is not an ambush by one man. That is an ambush of one man. The corrections official was writing quickly now. Garrity had stopped even pretending to remain calm. But Cole wasn't finished. Because the panel still held on to the easy thought waiting in the back of their minds. The one the headlines had carefully planted there. Convicted felon, trained fighter, even cornered, didn't he do too much? 4 men in the infirmary, one with a shattered jaw. He wasn't that the act of a genuinely dangerous man. So Vanessa Cole reached into her folder and pulled out the thing she'd been saving for exactly this moment. You keep calling my client trained, she said. Let me show you precisely how trained. She slid a sheet across the table. Marcus Hale, 18 professional fights, 18 wins, 14 knockouts, state lightweight champion, ranked in the national top 15 before his arrest. She let the panel read every line. This is not a man who learned to brawl in some prison yard. This is a professional athlete whose hands are, quite literally, registered as weapons. Garrity frowned. You're proving our point. He's dangerous. I'm proving the exact opposite, Cole said, and in about 10 seconds, you'll understand why. She played the fight then. He once at full speed, then again, slowed down frame by frame, the way the entire internet had already watched it 100 million times over. He fight her at his level, she narrated over the slow motion, throws a punch that generates enough force to end a life. He knows this. It's the very first thing they teach you, so watch closely what he does with 4 men trying to hurt him, in a locked room, with every legal and moral right in the world to defend himself by any means necessary. She pointed. First man, a body shot, not the head, the body. Drops him without permanently damaging him. Second man, he uses the man's own momentum, redirects him straight into the wall. He short counter. Third man, Mr. Stone. She froze the frame on the check hook. One punch, clean, he could have followed up right then. A man on the floor is a man you can finish off completely. He doesn't do it. He steps back instead. She advanced the footage to the final seconds. Marcus, completely untouched, kneeling beside the second man, checking whether he's still breathing. Here it is, Cole said softly. The most dangerous man in that entire room, down on his knees, making absolutely sure the person who came to hurt him is still alive and breathing. She looked at each panel member in turn. A man who genuinely wanted to hurt them could have crippled all 4 people in 12 seconds flat. He had the skill for it. He had every right to do it. Instead, he used the exact minimum force required to survive, and then he rendered aid. That is not the record of an animal. That is the most disciplined act of self-defense any of you will ever witness on a screen. The room fell silent, the particular kind of silence Marcus knew well, the kind that arrives right before a decision gets made. The corrections official turned to face Talbot directly. Officer, the pilot cameras, were you aware of their existence? Talbot opened his mouth, then closed it again. The pause was its own answer, and everyone in the room heard it clearly. Where were you, the official continued, the night of the incident, during the disturbance? At my desk, Talbot said. Doing reports with your back to the tier, Cole added. We have that on camera too. It all came apart quickly after that, the way these things always do once the first thread gets pulled. The fractured jaw victim statement collapsed completely against the footage of a man throwing a bolt shut from the inside. The witness accounts, every single one of them from Stone's own crew, turned to smoke under questioning. And one inmate who had stayed silent purely out of fear, an older man named Frank Delgado, stepped forward now that there was finally something worth stepping toward, and told the panel about 7 nights of cruelty he had personally watched unfold and felt powerless to stop. His Marcus sat through all of it without moving an inch. He had learned, inside that box, not to hope for anything. But when the corrections official set down her pen and said the words pending immediate review of Officer Talbot's conduct and the conditions inside Block C, something in his chest finally loosened for the first time in weeks. He thought of his mother. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe he might actually make it home in time. Vanessa Cole gathered her folder, leaned toward the glass partition, and said the only thing that truly mattered. They built their entire case, she told him, on a camera they thought was switched off. She nearly smiled. They forgot all about the one that was watching them the whole time. Justice, once it finally started moving, moved fast. The footage from the pilot cameras went to the State Corrections Board, then to the district attorney, then, inevitably, to the press that had been camped outside Stone Creek for 2 solid weeks. The official story did not serve contact with the truth. 7 nights of corridor footage do not lie. A locked shower door does not lie. And a man kneeling down to check his attacker's breathing does not lie either. Derek Stone was charged with felony assault, 4 separate counts, for the ambush he had filmed himself. His own trophy footage became the central evidence against him. The wired jaw he'd used to generate sympathy turned out to be the least of his problems. He was already serving time for the coma he'd put a man into years earlier. Now the parole he'd been counting on vanished entirely, and the court tacked on 8 more years to a sentence he'd believed was nearly finished. The king of Block C walked out of that hearing in cuffs into a silence from the other inmates that was louder than any cheer could ever have been. Officer Russ Talbot didn't go quietly, but he went. The investigation into the missing tear footage uncovered exactly what Vanessa had promised it would: a pattern of deliberately arranged blind spots, ignored complaints, and reports written specifically to protect the man who kept his block quiet. Talbot was stripped of his badge and charged with falsifying records and willful neglect of duty. The nod he had given Stone across a crowded cafeteria, the smallest gesture imaginable, had become the very thing that ended his entire career. His warden Patrick Garrity resigned before anyone could force him out. The man who hated attention more than anything else left under the brightest lights of his entire career, trailed by cameras down the same steps he'd hoped so badly to keep clear. A state monitor was assigned permanently to Stone Creek. The pilot camera program, the one accident that had ultimately saved an innocent man's life, was made permanent and expanded to cover every block in the facility. And then there was the original conviction that had put Marcus inside in the first place. Vanessa Cole didn't stop at the prison case. He took the robbery conviction apart the exact same way she took everything apart. Slowly, in broad daylight. The grainy tape, the rushed lineup, the overworked public defender who'd barely had time to read the file. She tracked down the gas station's original full footage and found a clerk who, shown a clear photograph at last, finally said the words that should have been spoken 3 years earlier. That's not him. That man was heavier, older. That is not the man. The court vacated Marcus Hale's conviction on a Tuesday morning. A wrongful imprisonment, immediate release. He walked out of Stone Creek through the same 3 gates that had once swallowed him whole, into a parking lot full of people he'd never met who had followed 12 seconds of his life, all the way to this exact moment. He stayed quiet as he passed by, the way a crowd goes quiet around something they sense is bigger than any photograph could capture. He didn't raise a fist in triumph. He didn't deliver a speech. He simply kept walking toward the one car that actually mattered. His aunt was behind the wheel. The passenger seat sat empty, reclined, a blanket folded neatly across it. "She wanted to come," his aunt said, her voice breaking apart. "She made us bring her this far. She's at the hospital, Marcus. She's holding on. She's been holding on just for this." He made it in time. That was the part that mattered more than the 8 added years, more than the badges and resignations and cameras combined. He walked into a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and knelt down beside a bed where a small, frail woman lay, and she opened her eyes and saw her son, free, whole, finally home. He lifted one thin hand to his face, to the cheek that had been slapped in a prison yard, what felt like a lifetime ago, and she simply held it there. "He knew," she whispered. "I always knew." He stayed with her. The story didn't end in that room, though. It had already grown far larger than him. 12 seconds had become something bigger than a single fight, a question the entire country kept asking out loud. How many quiet men are sitting in blind spots right now? How many true stories are buried under clean, official reports? Lawmakers cited the case directly. A reform bill carried provisions for mandatory camera coverage and independent complaint review. And people in the papers and the hearings started calling it the Hale Standard. Marcus Hale never asked for his name attached to any law. He'd only ever wanted to keep one promise. He had kept it. He was home. His mother lived another 14 months. Good months. She was there in a folding chair, by the door the day Marcus Hale opened the gym. It wasn't much, at first. A leased space in a rough part of town, a concrete floor, a ring he built himself from second-hand rope and donated canvas. He hung a single sign above the door. No champion's name, no logo, just 2 words, "Second Corner." Because everyone, he liked to say, deserves someone in their corner the second time around. Kids came first, the ones the neighborhood had already given up on. The ones teachers called trouble, and police called familiar faces. Marcus never asked about their records. He asked about their footwork. He taught them the thing he had learned the hardest way possible, in a place with no cameras. That real strength is the power you choose not to use. Anybody can throw a punch, he told them. It takes a real fighter to know exactly when not to. Frank Delgado ran the morning sessions. The old trainer had made parole 6 months after Marcos's release, and the very first call he made from outside the walls was to the gym. He stood in the corner now, with his half-moon glasses and his chess book, barking instructions at teenagers about keeping their hands up, and for the first time in 30 years, he looked exactly like a man standing right where he belonged. Then came the others, men freshly released from prison, blinking in the daylight, carrying records and reputations and nowhere left to go. Marcus handed them mops and gloves and a reason to show up every morning. Some of them had spent time in places just like Stone Creek. A few had even been Stone's men once, trying hard not to be anymore. Marcus never turned them away. He'd learned that the line between the man on the floor and the man standing over him is thinner than anyone ever wants to believe, and that mercy, given freely once, tends to come back around eventually. Vanessa Cole visited sometimes between cases. The Hale Standard had passed into law in 2 different states by then, and she still carried a folder, as always, full of other quiet men in other blind spots who needed someone to read the footage better than the people who had buried it in the first place. She never once ran out of folders, but she always said the gym was the only courtroom she'd ever seen where absolutely everybody won. Marcus still trained early, alone, before the kids ever arrived. He'd wrap his hands the old way, slow, knuckle by knuckle, and work the heavy bag in the gray morning light. Then he'd remember a yard, a slap, a promise. He had walked into that prison a champion nobody knew existed. He walked out a man everybody did. And somewhere inside a concrete box, he had decided that if his name was ever going to mean anything at all, it would mean exactly this: a second corner for anyone the world had already counted out. See, that's the story. But before you go, let me ask you something. The same way this story asked you, right at the start. Have you ever been underestimated, written off, talked down to, judged by a uniform or a face or a single bad chapter, by people who never once bothered to learn the rest of your story? If you have, then you already understand exactly what Marcus understood. So tell me down in the comments, when has someone underestimated you? And what did you do about it? He read every single one. If this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who's quietly holding a line that nobody else can see. And if you want more stories about the underestimated, the overlooked, and the quietly unbreakable, stay close, because your corner is right here. I'll be honest with you. I tell these stories because I've watched good people get treated like they're nothing, and I've watched the world to simply look away. Marcus isn't real, but that feeling absolutely is. So this one's for everyone who stayed quiet, stayed kind, and never once stopped being strong. I see you. I really do.